The blood-soaked telegram trembled in Zara Anderson's hands as she read the words that would change her life forever. Brother gravely injured. Stop, needs specialist surgery. Stop, $3,000 required. Stop, time critical. Stop. She collapsed onto the worn wooden chair behind her, the small general store suddenly feeling cavernous and cold despite the sweltering Nevada summer heat of 1876. Unionville, Nevada had been Zara's home for all 22 years of her life. The mining town had seen better days since the silver boom, but it had been enough for her and her brother Thomas to scrape by after their parents died from typhoid 3 years prior. Now Thomas lay dying in Carson City after being trampled during a cattle drive accident, and Zara had nowhere near enough money to save him. She looked around at the modest general store her parents had built, the only inheritance they'd left behind. The shelves stocked with dry goods, tools, fabrics, and sundries represented everything she owned in the world. $3,000 might as well have been $3 million for all she could gather on short notice. The bank wouldn't loan her a cent, not to a young, unmarried woman with dwindling business prospects. "I'll sell it all," she whispered to the empty store, determination hardening within her. "Every last button and sack of flour if that's what it takes." The bell above the door jingled, startling her from her thoughts. Zara hastily wiped the tears from her cheeks and straightened her simple calico dress before turning to face her customer. The man who entered wasn't from Unionville. Tall and broad-shouldered, he filled the doorframe with his presence. Dust from the trail covered his dark clothes and the wide-brimmed hat that shadowed piercing blue eyes. His weathered face suggested he was perhaps 30, though the hard life of the frontier could age a man prematurely. A star-shaped badge gleamed dully on his chest. "Afternoon, madam," he said, removing his hat. "Name's Hunter Reynolds, U.S. Marshal, just passing through on my way north." Zara quickly tucked the telegram into her pocket. "Welcome to Anderson's General Store, Marshal Reynolds." "Is there something specific you're looking for today?" The marshal's gaze swept the store before settling back on her. "Some jerky for the trail if you have it. Coffee beans too." He paused, studying her face. "Everything all right, miss?" "Anderson, Zara Anderson." She moved to the counter where she kept the beef jerky in glass jars. "And yes, everything's fine." It was a poor lie, and from the marshal's expression he knew it, but he didn't press, merely watching as she measured out coffee beans with shaking hands. "That'll be 35 cents, she said, wrapping the purchases. Marshal Reynolds placed a silver dollar on the counter. "Keep the change. I couldn't possibly consider it a contribution to whatever's got you so upset you can barely hold those scales steady." Zara's composure cracked. Fresh tears welled in her eyes, and before she could stop herself, the whole story came tumbling out about Thomas, about the impossible sum of money, about her desperate plan to sell everything she owned. $3,000 in 3 days. The marshal whistled low. "That's a tall order, Miss Anderson." "I know it's impossible," she admitted, "but he's all I have left in this world." Marshal Reynolds was quiet for a long moment, his eyes thoughtful. "Perhaps not impossible," he said finally. "There's word of a wealthy cattle baron, Harlan Reed, who's been looking to establish businesses along this stretch. Rumor has it he's staying at the Grand Hotel in Virginia City for another day or so." Hope flickered to life within her. "You think he might buy my store? It's worth asking." "Virginia City's only half a day's ride from here." Zara looked around at the store, her parents' legacy, her only security. "I don't have a choice," she said quietly. "I'm headed that way myself," Marshal Reynolds offered. "I could escort you, make sure you arrive safely." She hesitated, uncertain about traveling alone with a man she just met, marshal or not. Reading her expression, he added, "Or I could carry a letter of introduction if that would be more proper." "No," she decided quickly. "Time is too precious." "If you wouldn't mind the company, I'd be grateful for the escort. I can close up now and be ready to leave within the hour." The marshal nodded. "I'll see about getting you a horse from the livery." True to his word, Marshal Reynolds returned with a gentle mare as Zara locked up the store, a small valise containing essential items in hand. The sun was still high when they set out, the dusty trail stretching before them toward Virginia City and what Zara desperately hoped would be her brother's salvation. "Have you been a marshal long?" she asked as they rode, trying to distract herself from her worries. 5 years now," he replied. Before that, I rode with the cavalry during the war. That explains the straight back, Zara observed. My father always said you could spot an ex-soldier by how they sit in a saddle. A small smile crossed the marshal's face. Your father was right about that. He glanced at her. And your family's been in Unionville long? My parents came west in '55 before I was born. Opened the store when the silver strike brought miners flooding in. She sighed. The mines aren't what they were, but we still had enough business to get by. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythm of the horses' hooves a soothing counterpoint to Zara's racing thoughts. The marshal kept a vigilant eye on their surroundings, one hand never far from the Colt revolver at his hip. Is there trouble you're expecting? She finally asked. Always best to be prepared in these parts, he answered. Road agents have been active between here and Virginia City. Nothing to worry about, just staying alert. As if summoned by his words, two riders appeared on the ridge ahead, silhouetted against the late afternoon sky. Marshal Reynolds tensed, subtly adjusting his position to place himself between Zara and the approaching men. Stay calm, he murmured. Could be nothing. But as the riders drew closer, their intentions became clear. Bandanas covered the lower halves of their faces and both had rifles drawn. Well now, what have we here? Called the taller of the two as they blocked the road. A lawman and a pretty lady all alone on this dangerous stretch. U.S. Marshal, Reynolds said clearly, his hand hovering near his gun. I suggest you boys move along. The second man laughed. One marshal against the two of us, I like them odds. I wouldn't, Reynolds replied calmly. Now, are you going to be smart and ride away or foolish and die today? There was a moment of tense silence as the bandits weighed their options. Zara held her breath, fear squeezing her chest. Maybe another day, Marshal, the taller man finally said. Enjoy your ride. With a mocking tip of his hat, he wheeled his horse around and the two vanished back over the ridge. Zara released her breath. Do you think they're really gone? For now. But we should keep moving, make Virginia City before dark. Reynolds' expression was grim. They might decide to try their luck with reinforcements. They urged their horses to a faster pace, eating up the miles between them in safety. As the sun began to set, the sprawling, bustling metropolis of Virginia City appeared on the horizon, its buildings climbing the slopes of Mount Davidson. Even in the twilight, Zara could see it was a far cry from sleepy Unionville. The Grand Hotel is on C Street, Reynolds told her as they entered the town, navigating through the evening crowds. Miners, businessmen, and ladies of questionable reputation thronged the wooden sidewalks, while wagons and riders filled the muddy streets despite the hour. The Grand Hotel was indeed grand by frontier standards, 3 stories of elegant architecture with actual glass windows and a polished oak entrance. Zara suddenly felt every speck of trail dust on her simple dress. Perhaps we should find a more modest establishment, she suggested, intimidated by the fancy doorman and well-dressed patrons visible through the windows. Reynolds shook his head. If you want to meet Harlan Reed, this is where he'll be. He dismounted and offered her his hand. Besides, I know the owner. He owes me a favor. Inside, the lobby gleamed with polished brass fixtures and velvet upholstery. A crystal chandelier cast warm light over the reception desk, where a bespectacled clerk raised his eyebrows at their dusty appearance. Marshal Reynolds, the clerk acknowledged with a nod. Been some time since you graced our establishment. Evening, Parker. Is Mr. Simmons available in his office as always? Reynolds turned to Zara. Wait here, I'll arrange rooms for us. He disappeared down a hallway, leaving Zara standing uncomfortably in the lobby, acutely aware of the curious glances from well-heeled guests. She was relieved when he returned several minutes later, accompanied by a portly gentleman with an impressive mustache. Miss Anderson, this is Gerald Simmons, proprietor of the Grand Hotel. He's kindly offered you a room for the night and, more importantly, information about Mr. Reed. Delighted to meet you, Miss Anderson, Simmons said with a small bow. Any friend of the Marshal's is welcome here. And as for Harlan Reed, you're in luck. He's dining in our restaurant as we speak. Zara's heart leaped. Now, but I'm hardly presentable. Nonsense, Simmons interrupted. The man made his fortune driving cattle. He won't mind a little honest trail dust. He glanced at Reynolds. Though I imagine the lady would appreciate a moment to freshen up. I've had hot water sent to room 212. The restaurant is on the main floor through those doors when you're ready." 30 minutes later, having washed away the worst of the trail dust and changed into her one good dress, a modest blue cotton with white trim, Zara descended the stairs to the hotel restaurant. Marshall Reynolds waited in the lobby, his own appearance considerably improved. He'd shaved and changed into a clean shirt, though he still wore his badge and sidearm. "You clean up well, Marshall," she observed with a small smile. "As do you, Miss Anderson." His eyes appreciated her transformation with a warmth that brought color to her cheeks. "Mr. Simmons pointed out Reed's table," he continued, offering his arm. "Shall we?" The restaurant was elegant without being ostentatious, filled with the gentle clink of silverware and murmur of conversation. Reynolds led her to a corner table where a man sat alone, reviewing papers while dining on a steak. Harlan Reed looked to be in his 50s, with iron gray hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His tailored suit spoke of considerable wealth, but his hands were those of a man who'd worked his way up from nothing, broad, calloused, and strong. "Mr. Reed," Reynolds said as they approached. "Forgive the interruption, U.S. Marshal Hunter Reynolds, and this is Miss Zara Anderson of Unionville." Reed set aside his papers, studying them with shrewd eyes. "Marshal," he acknowledged. "Miss Anderson, what can I do for you? We were hoping for a moment of your time regarding a business opportunity," Reynolds replied. "If you're amenable." Reed gestured to the empty chairs. "I'm always interested in opportunities. Please join me." Once seated, Zara found herself struggling to begin. How did one calmly propose selling everything they owned to a complete stranger? "Miss Anderson owns the general store in Unionville," Reynolds supplied when her silence stretched too long. "It's the only such establishment for 20 miles in any direction. Good location, solid customer base despite the mining slowdown." Reed's eyebrows rose slightly. "And you're looking to sell, Miss Anderson. May I ask why?" "My brother," she said, finally finding her voice. "He's gravely injured and needs specialized surgery in Carson City. The doctor requires $3,000 and I have 3 days to provide it." "I see." Reed's expression revealed nothing. "And the store, what would be a fair price in your estimation? The building, inventory, and goodwill, perhaps $2,500 under normal circumstances." Zara took a deep breath. "But given my situation, I'm prepared to accept $2,000. Reed leaned back, considering her. "A desperate seller rarely gets a fair price, Miss Anderson. I'm aware, Mr. Reed, but my brother's life is worth more than any store." The businessman studied her for a long moment. "Your honesty is refreshing." He turned to Reynolds. "And you, Marshall? What's your interest in this transaction?" "Just helping a citizen in need," Reynolds replied evenly. Reed didn't look convinced. "I'll need to see the property before making any decision. I'm headed back to my ranch tomorrow, but I could stop in Unionville on the way. Say noon." Hope and relief flooded through Zara. "That would be perfect. Thank you for considering it," Reed nodded. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some correspondence to finish before retiring." Outside the restaurant, Zara could barely contain her excitement. "Do you think he'll buy it?" "He seemed interested, didn't he?" Reynolds' expression was more reserved. "Reed's a businessman first and foremost. He'll only buy if he sees profit in it." He hesitated. "There's something else you should know about him. He has a reputation for being ruthless in negotiations. Once he knows you're desperate, he might offer far less than the place is worth." Zara's elation dimmed. "I don't have the luxury of pride right now. Whatever he offers, I'll have to take it." "We'll see," Reynolds said. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." Back in Unionville the next day, Zara hurried to make the store presentable. Marshall Reynolds had escorted her back at dawn, and now he helped sweep the boardwalk while she organized merchandise and dusted shelves. "You don't have to stay," she told him as the hour approached noon. "You've already done more than enough." "I'd like to see this through," he replied simply. "Besides, it might help to have someone else present during negotiations." His consideration warmed her, even as anxiety knotted her stomach. What if Reed offered only a fraction of what she needed? What if he didn't show up at all? Her fears about the latter were dispelled when a fine carriage pulled by 2 matched bays stopped outside the store precisely at noon. Harlan Reed stepped down, accompanied by a younger man in a suit carrying a leather portfolio. "Miss Anderson," Reed greeted her. "This is my associate, Mr. Parker. He handles the paperwork for my acquisitions." Zara welcomed them into the store, trying to keep her nervousness at bay as Reed conducted a methodical inspection. He examined the shelves, checked the ledger books, inspected the living quarters behind the store, and asked pointed questions about suppliers and regular customers. "You've maintained this place well," he finally said, returning to the main room. "Your parents would be proud." The unexpected compliment caught her off guard. "You knew my parents? I passed through here during the silver boom, bought supplies from them a few times, honest people." He nodded to his associate. "Mr. Parker, would you wait in the carriage? I'd like to discuss terms privately." Once they were alone except for Reynolds, who stood unobtrusively by the door, Reed's demeanor changed subtly. "I won't insult you with false sympathy, Miss Anderson. Your situation is unfortunate, but business is business." Zara steeled herself. "I understand, Mr. Reed. I'm prepared to offer $1,500 for the store, inventory, and building. That's my final price." The amount hit her like a physical blow, only half of what she needed. "Mr. Reed, please," she began, desperation creeping into her voice. "I need $3,000 for my brother's surgery." "The property isn't worth $3,000 in this economy," Reed countered. "$1,500 is generous considering." $2,000 then," she pleaded. "I can borrow the rest somehow." Reed shook his head. $1,500 today, cash. "Or I'll be on my way." Zara felt the room spinning. $1,500 would get her halfway, but where would she find the rest in time? She looked around at the store that had been her family's legacy and her home. Now it would be sacrificed and still might not save Thomas. "Perhaps there's another solution," Marshall Reynolds said, stepping forward. His voice was steady, his expression unreadable as he addressed Reed. "The store's worth more than $1,500, and we both know it." Reed's eyes narrowed. "This isn't your business, Marshall." "I'm making it my business." Reynolds moved to stand beside Zara. "I'll buy the store for $3,000. Zara gasped, turning to stare at him. "Marshall," Reynolds kept his eyes on Reed. "$3,000 right now." A tense silence filled the store as the two men locked gazes. Finally, Reed laughed a short, surprised sound. "You don't have that kind of money, lawman." Without responding, Reynolds reached inside his vest and produced a leather wallet. From it, he extracted a bank draft and held it up. $3,000 from the First National Bank of Denver, made out to cash, easily transferable. Reed stared at the draft, then at Reynolds with new calculation in his eyes. "Why would a U.S. Marshal carry that kind of money? That's not your concern." Reynolds turned to Zara. "Miss Anderson, do we have a deal? $3,000 for your store?" Zara's mind raced. This made no sense. Why would Reynolds do this? Where had he gotten such a sum? And yet the answer to her prayers stood before her, offering exactly what she needed. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "yes, we have a deal." Reed's face darkened. "This is highly irregular. I was negotiating in good faith." "And now the negotiation is over," Reynolds replied calmly. "Miss Anderson has accepted my offer." For a moment, Reed looked like he might argue further, then he shrugged. "Your loss, Marshall. The mining boom is over. This town will be a ghost within 5 years. He tipped his hat to Zara. "Good day, Miss Anderson. I hope your brother recovers." After Reed departed, Zara turned to Reynolds, bewildered. "I don't understand. Why would you do this?" Reynolds handed her the bank draft. "You need this more than I do right now. But it's an enormous sum, and the store, you don't need a store. You're a marshal. You travel constantly. Consider it an investment in Unionville's future." He smiled slightly. "And in the well-being of a family that, by all accounts, has been a pillar of this community." Zara clutched the draft, overwhelmed by conflicting emotions. "This is too much." "I can't possibly accept." "You can, and you will," he interrupted gently. "Your brother needs that surgery." "At least let me draw up a proper bill of sale," she insisted. "If you're buying the store, we should do this properly." Reynolds nodded. "Fair enough." They spent the next hour completing the paperwork, Zara carefully documenting the transfer of ownership while still trying to comprehend the marshal's extraordinary gesture. As she handed him the signed documents, another thought struck her. "I'll need to pack my things," she realized. "The living quarters go with the store." "There's no rush," Reynolds assured her. "I won't be staying in Unionville after today. The store needs someone to run it, and who better than the person who knows it best?" Zara stared at him, understanding slowly dawning. "You want me to continue running the store? As what, an employee?" As a partner, if you're willing, you keep operating as you have been. We'll split the profits once your brother is well." Tears welled in her eyes. Why would you do all this for a stranger?" Reynolds' expression softened. "Let's just say I know what it's like to be desperate to save family." He glanced away briefly. "I lost my sister years ago because we couldn't afford a doctor. I swore I'd never stand by and watch that happen to someone else if I could help it." Before Zara could respond, the store door opened, admitting Mrs. Whitfield, one of her regular customers. "I'll leave you to your business," Reynolds said quietly. "I have some matters to attend to in town. We can discuss the details later." As he departed, Zara turned to serve Mrs. Whitfield, her mind still reeling from the morning's events. The bank draft felt heavy in her pocket, a miracle she couldn't quite believe. Later that afternoon, with the store temporarily closed, Zara packed a small bag for her journey to Carson City. The stage would leave at dawn, and if all went well, she would reach her brother by tomorrow evening with the money for his surgery. For the first time in days, hope replaced the crushing fear in her heart. A knock at the door interrupted her preparations. She opened it to find Marshall Reynolds, his horse saddled behind him. "You're leaving?" she asked, surprised by the pang of disappointment she felt. "Duty calls. There's a situation near Reno that requires attention." He handed her an envelope. "The deed to the store returned to your name." "But you bought it," she protested. "The paperwork was necessary to make the transaction legitimate in Reed's eyes. I've endorsed everything back to you." He smiled at her confusion. "Miss Anderson, I didn't buy your store to own it. I bought it to give it back to you." Zara stared at him, speechless. "The money is yours," he continued. "Get your brother the surgery he needs. The store remains yours as well. I ask nothing in return." "I don't understand," she finally managed. "Why go through the charade? Why not just give me the money?" "Would you have accepted it?" When she hesitated, he nodded. "That's why. Your pride wouldn't allow charity, but a business transaction maintains your dignity." His smile turned wry. "And I didn't entirely trust Reed not to take advantage if I simply offered to make up the difference in his price." "How can I ever repay you? You don't need to." He glanced toward the horizon. "I should reach Reno by morning if I ride through the night." "Wait," Zara said impulsively. Will you come back through Unionville after your business in Reno?" Something flickered in Reynolds' eyes, surprise, perhaps, or pleasure. "If you'd like me to, I would, very much." She stepped closer, summoning her courage. "At least let me thank you properly when I return with Thomas." "In that case, I'll make a point of it." He tipped his hat. "Safe journey, Miss Anderson." Zara watched him ride away, the setting sun casting his silhouette in gold. Only after he'd vanished from sight did she realize she was still clutching the envelope containing the deed to her store, the store that was somehow hers again, thanks to the extraordinary kindness of a man she barely knew. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur for Zara. She reached Carson City in time, the surgery was performed successfully, and though Thomas' recovery would be slow, the doctors were optimistic. She stayed by his side through the worst of it, then arranged for his transport back to Unionville once he was strong enough to travel. There had been no word from Marshall Reynolds. She told herself this wasn't surprising. Marshals followed trouble, and trouble rarely kept a schedule. Still, each day she found herself watching the road, hoping to see a familiar figure on horseback approaching. It was a crisp October morning when Thomas was finally well enough to sit on the store's porch, a blanket over his legs despite the sunshine. "You never did tell me exactly how you got the money for the surgery," he remarked, watching her sweep the boardwalk. Zara had shared an abbreviated version of events, reluctant to fully explain the Marshal's extraordinary gesture. "I told you, a U.S. Marshal helped arrange a loan." Thomas raised an eyebrow. Must have been quite a marshal to secure $3,000 on short notice. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. A familiar figure on a bay gelding appeared at the end of the street, and Zara's heart leaped in her chest. "Is that him?" Thomas asked, noting his sister's reaction. "Yes," she replied softly. "That's Marshall Reynolds." Reynolds dismounted in front of the store, looking more trail-worn than when she'd last seen him. A healing cut marked his left cheekbone, and he carried himself with the slight stiffness of someone nursing bruised ribs. "Miss Anderson," he greeted her, removing his hat. "Mr. Anderson," he added, nodding to Thomas. "Good to see you looking so well." Thanks to you from what little my sister has told me, Thomas replied, though I suspect there's more to the story than I've heard. Reynolds glanced at Zara, a question in his eyes. I didn't want to impose on your privacy, she explained, or make Thomas feel indebted. Well, I'm feeling indebted regardless, Thomas said, and curious. Perhaps you'll join us for dinner, Marshall, and satisfy both conditions, Reynolds smiled. I'd be honored. That evening, over a simple but hearty meal in the living quarters behind the store, Reynolds provided a fuller account of the transaction with Reed, though he downplayed his own role as much as possible. Thomas listened with growing amazement. So you just happened to be carrying $3,000 while passing through Unionville? He asked skeptically when Reynolds finished. The marshal set down his coffee cup. Not exactly. The bank draft was evidence in a case I just closed embezzled funds I was returning to Denver. I was authorized to convert it for legitimate law enforcement purposes if necessary. And my surgery qualified as a legitimate law enforcement purpose. Thomas pressed. Reynolds met his gaze steadily. I filed the paperwork listing it as payment to a confidential informant whose information led to the resolution of a federal case. My superiors didn't question it. So you falsified reports? Thomas looked troubled. Thomas, Zara admonished. It's a fair question, Reynolds said. No, I didn't falsify anything. The paperwork is accurate as far as it goes. The details are necessarily vague for the protection of all involved. But you could lose your badge if anyone looked too closely, Thomas pointed out. I considered the risk worthwhile. The marshal's eyes moved to Zara. Some things matter more than a badge. A charged silence filled the room. Thomas looked between them, then abruptly pushed back his chair. I believe I'm feeling rather tired. Surgery recovery, you know, if you'll excuse me. Despite Zara's protests that he didn't need to leave, Thomas retreated to his bedroom, leaving her alone with Reynolds. Your brother's protective of you, the marshal observed. We're protective of each other, she corrected, gathering the dishes. Especially now. Reynolds rose to help her. He has every right to question my motives. $3,000 is no small sum. And what are your motives, Marshal? Zara asked quietly, setting down the plates she'd been stacking. You've never really explained why you did what you did. He was silent for a long moment. At first, it was simply the right thing to do. You were in an impossible situation and I had the means to help. He met her eyes. But I can't claim it was entirely altruistic. There was something about you from the first moment, your courage, your determination. I admired that, and then. He hesitated, and then, she prompted. And then I found myself thinking about you during the weeks in Reno, wondering if your brother's surgery had been successful, if you were all right. His voice softened. If you'd meant it when you asked me to come back through Unionville. Zara's heart quickened. I meant it. I'm glad. He stepped closer. Because I'd like to stay, for a while at least, if that would be welcome. Very welcome, she whispered. The distance between them seemed to vanish as he gently took her hand. His touch was warm, calloused from years of hard work, yet infinitely gentle. I should warn you, he said softly. A marshal's life isn't an easy one. I'm called away often, sometimes for weeks. Then we should make the most of the time when you're here, she replied, finding boldness she hadn't known she possessed. His smile transformed his face, erasing the weariness and hardness of the trail. I'd like that very much, Miss Anderson. Zara, she corrected. I think we're well past formalities, don't you, Zara? He repeated, the name sounding like something precious on his lips. And I'm Hunter. Hunter, she echoed, liking the way it felt to say his name. He was still holding her hand, his thumb tracing small circles against her palm. The simple touch sent shivers up her arm. I should go, he said reluctantly. It's getting late and your brother will understand if you stay for coffee, she finished for him. Unless you have somewhere else to be, nowhere that matters. He released her hand to help her clear the rest of the table, their movements falling into an easy rhythm as if they'd been doing this together for years, instead of minutes. Over coffee, he told her about his work in Reno, a counterfeiting ring he'd helped break up, and she shared stories of Thomas' recovery. The hours slipped by, conversation flowing effortlessly between them. You never mentioned your family, she said during a lull, other than your sister. A shadow crossed his face. Not much to tell. Father died in a mining accident when I was 12. Mother remarried a man who had little use for another man's children. My sister Emma and I made our own way after that. I'm sorry about Emma, Zara said softly. It was a long time ago, influenza. We couldn't afford the doctor's fee. His jaw tightened at the memory. She was 16. I was 18 and working as a deputy sheriff. By the time I'd earned enough, it was too late. Zara reached across the table to touch his hand. That's why you helped us, he nodded, partly. But also because. He hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Because from the moment I walked into your store that day, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. A connection, as if I'd found something I didn't even know I was looking for. The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Zara's heart pounded as she realized her feelings mirrored his own. I felt it too, she admitted. Even in the midst of everything with Thomas, there was something about you I couldn't ignore. Hunter's eyes darkened. He stood, moving around the table to her side. She rose to meet him, drawn by a force she couldn't resist. May I call on you properly? He asked, his voice low. Court you as you deserve? Yes, she whispered, hardly believing this was happening. He lifted his hand to her cheek, his touch feather light. I'll be in Unionville for at least a week before duty calls again. I'd like to spend as much of that time with you as you'll allow. I think that can be arranged, she said, smiling up at him. He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. Instead, she raised herself on tiptoe, meeting him halfway as his lips brushed against hers, a gentle, questioning kiss that nonetheless sent her heart racing. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened, becoming something more urgent, more profound. When they finally parted, both breathless, Hunter rested his forehead against hers. I should go, he murmured. Before I forget myself entirely, where are you staying? She asked, reluctant to see him leave. I've taken a room at the boarding house. Will I see you tomorrow? He smiled. Try to keep me away. True to his word, Hunter appeared at the store the next morning just as Zara was opening. Each day that followed fell into a pattern. He would help around the store when she was busy, accompany her on errands, and join the Andersons for dinner each evening. Thomas, initially wary, gradually warmed to the marshal as he observed the man's evident regard for his sister. On Hunter's fourth day in Unionville, a telegram arrived summoning him to Sacramento. He would have to leave the following morning. That evening after dinner, Thomas tactfully retired early, leaving Hunter and Zara to say their goodbyes in private. How long will you be gone? She asked as they sat on the porch swing, the autumn night cool enough to justify sitting close together. A week, perhaps 2. He took her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. I'll return as soon as I can. I know your work is important, she said, trying to hide her disappointment. Not as important as this, he replied, squeezing her hand. As you, the admission warmed her. We've known each other such a short time, she marveled. Less than a month, yet I feel as if we've known each other always, he finished when she trailed off. I feel it too. Is that possible to know so quickly? Hunter considered the question. My father used to say that when you find the right person, your soul recognizes them immediately. The rest is just your mind catching up to what your heart already knows. Zara leaned her head against his shoulder. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. Hunter's arm slipped around her waist. He also said that when you find that person, you shouldn't waste time questioning the miracle. And what do you think? She asked, looking up at him. In answer, he kissed her deeply, thoroughly, leaving no doubt as to his feelings. When they parted, Zara was breathless, clinging to him as if she might float away otherwise. I think, Hunter said, his voice husky, that I'm falling in love with you, Zara Anderson, and that terrifies and exhilarates me in equal measure. Joy flooded through her. Then we're both terrified and exhilarated together because I'm falling in love with you too. He drew her closer, his embrace a promise. I will come back to you, he vowed. No matter what happens in Sacramento, I will come back. I'll be waiting, she promised. The next morning, she and Thomas stood on the porch as Hunter mounted his horse. He tipped his hat to them, his eyes lingering on Zara's face as if memorizing every detail. 2 weeks, he reminded her. At most, she nodded, holding back tears. It was foolish to be so affected by a temporary parting, and yet her heart ached as if something precious was being torn away. As he rode out of Unionville, Thomas placed a supportive hand on his sister's shoulder. He'll be back, he assured her. I know, she replied. But as Hunter's figure disappeared into the distance, a shadow of doubt crept into her heart. The world was vast and dangerous, especially for a lawman. What if he never returned? The days crawled by. Zara threw herself into work, reopening the store full-time now that Thomas was well enough to help for short periods. Business was steady, if not brisk, and the familiar routine brought comfort. A week passed with no word from Hunter. Then 10 days. Thomas tried to distract her with plans for expanding the store's inventory, but her thoughts constantly strayed to Sacramento and the man who had captured her heart so swiftly. On the 12th day, just as she was closing up, a stranger entered, a young man in a smart uniform. "Miss Anderson?" he inquired. "Telegram for you." Her hands trembled as she accepted the envelope. Thomas appeared from the back room, his expression concerned as he watched her tear it open. "It's from Hunter," she said, scanning the brief message. "He's been delayed, some complication with the case." Relief washed over her. "He says he'll be another week at least." "That's good news then," Thomas said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "At least he's all right." "Yes," Zara agreed, tucking the telegram into her pocket. "At least he's all right." But as another week stretched into 2 with no further word, her worry returned tenfold. The telegram boy knew her by name now, shaking his head apologetically each time she asked if there were any messages. November arrived with bitter winds and the first dusting of snow. Business slowed as people ventured out less frequently in the worsening weather. Thomas, fully recovered now, took over more of the store duties, insisting Zara take time to rest. "You're running yourself ragged," he scolded one evening as they closed up. He wouldn't want that. "I know," she admitted. "I just can't help thinking that something's happened. He would have sent word if he could." Thomas hesitated, then said gently, "Zara, you have to consider the possibility that he's not coming back. Marshals lead dangerous lives." "Or perhaps he simply don't," she interrupted. "Don't say it. Hunter made a promise. He'll keep it if he's able." Thomas didn't argue further, but the seed of doubt he'd planted took root. As November waned with no sign of Hunter, Zara found herself facing the possibility that Thomas might be right. 3 days before Thanksgiving, a fierce storm swept through Nevada, dropping several feet of snow and effectively isolating Unionville from the surrounding communities. The store remained closed as the townsfolk hunkered down to wait out the blizzard. On the second day of the storm, as darkness fell early and winds howled around the building, someone pounded urgently on the back door of the living quarters. Thomas grabbed his shotgun. "Stay back," he warned Zara as he approached the door cautiously. "Who's there?" he called. "Thomas." A faint voice replied, barely audible above the storm. "It's Hunter. Let me in." Zara rushed forward, pushing past her brother to throw open the door. There on the threshold stood Hunter Reynolds, covered in snow, his face pale with cold and exhaustion. A blood-stained bandage was visible beneath his open coat. "Hunter," she cried, pulling him inside. He staggered, leaning heavily against her. "Sorry I'm late," he managed before his knees buckled. Together, Zara and Thomas carried him to the sofa near the fire. Zara quickly removed his snow-crusted coat and hat while Thomas poured brandy. "What happened?" she demanded, horrified by the blood-stained shirt beneath his coat. "You're hurt." Hunter accepted the brandy from Thomas with a shaking hand. "Ambushed outside Sacramento," he explained between sips. "The counterfeiters had friends. I took a bullet, but nothing vital was hit," he grimaced. "Been recuperating in Carson City for the past 3 weeks. Doctor only cleared me to travel yesterday." "And you rode through this storm?" Thomas asked incredulously. "You could have died." "I made a promise," Hunter replied simply, his eyes finding Zara's. 2 weeks, I said. I was already a month overdue." Tears filled her eyes. "You should have waited until the storm passed. Couldn't wait another day to see you." His hand reached for hers, cold fingers entwining with warm ones. "Missed you too much." Thomas cleared his throat. I'll check on the horses, make sure they're secure for the night." He grabbed his coat and slipped out, giving them privacy. The moment they were alone, Zara threw her arms around Hunter, mindful of his wound. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered against his neck. "Never," he promised, holding her close. "Takes more than a bullet and a blizzard to keep me from you." She drew back just enough to look at him, her hand gently touching his face, relearning the contours she'd memorized during their brief time together. He looked thinner, older somehow, the lines around his eyes deeper than before. "Don't ever scare me like that again," she admonished. "I'll do my best." He smiled tiredly. "Though trouble seems to find me with alarming regularity." Then I'll just have to keep you close where I can watch over you, she declared. Hunter's smile deepened. I like the sound of that. He shifted, wincing slightly. I brought you something in my saddlebag. It can wait. You need rest. No, this can't wait. He struggled to sit up straighter. In the small pocket, a leather pouch. Curious, Zara retrieved his saddlebag from where she'd placed it by the door. She found the pouch easily small, soft leather worn smooth with age. Inside was a ring, simple but elegant, a small diamond catching the firelight. It was my mother's, Hunter explained, watching her face. Before she remarried, she gave it to me, said to save it for the woman who claimed my heart. His voice grew softer. That's you, Zara, if you'll have me. She stared at the ring, then at him, hardly daring to believe what was happening. Are you asking? I know it's fast, he acknowledged. Some would say too fast, but when you know, you know. He took the ring from her trembling fingers. I love you, Zara Anderson. Will you marry me? Yes, she answered without hesitation. Yes, I will. He slipped the ring onto her finger where it fit as if made for her. Then he drew her into a tender kiss that conveyed all the longing of their separation and all the promise of their future together. When Thomas returned an hour later, he found them still by the fire, Zara curled against Hunter's side, her head on his shoulder, his arm protectively around her. The ring on her finger caught Thomas' eye immediately. I see congratulations are in order, he said, stamping snow from his boots. Zara blushed. Hunter has asked me to marry him, and you've accepted. It wasn't a question. Thomas studied them thoughtfully. You're certain, both of you. This isn't just the emotion of reunion after danger. Hunter met his gaze steadily. I've never been more certain of anything. Nor I, Zara affirmed. Thomas nodded slowly. Then I'm happy for you both. He crossed the room to shake Hunter's hand. Welcome to the family, Marshall. Though I assume you'll be giving up that dangerous line of work now that you're to be a married man, Hunter glanced at Zara. We haven't discussed the details yet. There will be time for that, she said, squeezing his hand. For now, he needs rest and recovery. The storm lasted another 2 days, providing a cocoon of privacy for the newly engaged couple. Hunter's wound, while painful, was healing well, and by the time the snow began to clear, he was moving more easily. On Thanksgiving Day, they announced their engagement to the small gathering at the church's community dinner. The news was met with surprised congratulations from the townsfolk, many of whom remembered Hunter's previous visit and the mysterious circumstances surrounding Thomas' surgery funding. Spring wedding, suggested Mrs. Whitfield, always eager for a celebration. Zara looked to Hunter, who smiled. Spring sounds perfect, he agreed. By then, I'll have made arrangements for my new position. New position? Zara questioned later when they were alone. I've been thinking, he said, taking her hands. Thomas is right about the dangers of a marshal's work. I don't want to leave you a widow before we've had a chance at a life together. What will you do instead? Carson City has offered me a position as sheriff. It's still law enforcement, but more settled, less traveling, more regular hours. He searched her face. Would that be acceptable? I know you have the store here in Unionville. The store can be sold, she said immediately, or we could keep it as an investment. Thomas has expressed interest in running it himself. Hope lit his eyes. You'd be willing to move to Carson City? I'd go anywhere with you, she replied simply. But Carson City would be perfect, close enough to visit Thomas regularly, large enough to offer opportunities. Then it's decided. He drew her into his arms. Sheriff and Mrs. Reynolds of Carson City has a nice ring to it, don't you think? The nicest, she agreed, stretching up to kiss him. The winter months passed in a flurry of preparations. Hunter formally accepted the sheriff's position, commencing his duties in January while returning to Unionville whenever weather permitted. Zara and Thomas restructured their business arrangement, with Thomas taking full management of the store while Zara retained part ownership. By February, wedding plans were well underway. The ceremony would be held in Unionville's small church in early April, followed by a move to Carson City, where Hunter had purchased a modest house near the sheriff's office. March brought unexpected news when a lawyer from San Francisco arrived in Unionville seeking Zara and Thomas. Your uncle, Malcolm Anderson, has passed away, the lawyer informed them. As his only living relatives, you are his heirs. Neither sibling had ever met their father's brother, who had gone to California during the gold rush and severed family ties. What exactly are we inheriting? Thomas asked skeptically. Mr. Anderson was fortunate in his investments, the lawyer explained. He leaves a substantial sum, approximately $20,000, to be divided equally between you. The news stunned them both. Such a fortune was beyond anything they'd imagined. There's more, the lawyer continued. He also owned a successful mercantile business in San Francisco. The property and inventory are part of the estate. That evening, Zara shared the news with Hunter, who was equally amazed by their change in circumstances. This changes everything, she realized. We could open a store in Carson City or expand Thomas' business here, or whatever you want, Hunter said, kissing her forehead. The money doesn't change my feelings, but I'm happy knowing you'll be secure no matter what. On a perfect spring day in early April 1877, Zara Anderson became Zara Reynolds in a ceremony witnessed by the entire population of Unionville. She wore a gown of ivory silk ordered from San Francisco, and Hunter cut a handsome figure in a new black suit. After the wedding feast, as they prepared to depart for Carson City in a new carriage, a wedding gift from Thomas, Hunter drew Zara aside. "I have something for you," he said, pressing a small package into her hands. Inside was a delicate silver locket. When she opened it, she found a tiny photograph of Hunter on one side and, to her surprise, a small scrap of paper on the other. "What's this?" she asked, unfolding it carefully. "The receipt," he explained, "for the store I bought from you, our beginning." Tears filled her eyes as she remembered that desperate day when a stranger had purchased everything she owned, then given it all back without expecting anything in return. "I never imagined then that I'd find not just a savior, but the love of my life," she said, closing the locket and pressing it to her heart. Hunter drew her into his arms. "And I never imagined that stopping for coffee and jerky would lead me to mine." He kissed her softly. "Ready for our adventure, Mrs. Reynolds?" Zara smiled up at him, her heart full. "With you, always." As they rode away toward their new life together, Zara thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. Her brother's accident, so devastating at the time, had ultimately led to her greatest happiness. By losing everything, she had gained everything that truly mattered. The road to Carson City stretched before them, bathed in golden spring sunshine, a promise of all the days they would share, all the challenges they would face together, and all the love that had blossomed from the most unexpected beginning. 10 years later, Hunter and Zara Reynolds stood on the porch of their spacious Carson City home, watching their 3 children play in the yard: 8-year-old Emma, 6-year-old James, and 3-year-old Daniel. The Reynolds Mercantile, now the largest in the city, had just celebrated its 9th anniversary, and Hunter's tenure as sheriff had made Carson City one of the safest communities in Nevada. "Do you ever miss it?" Zara asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "The excitement of being a marshal." Hunter's arm tightened around her waist. "Not for a moment," he assured her, "though I do occasionally miss that little store in Unionville where I first saw you." "The best purchase you ever made," she teased. "And the best return," he agreed, kissing her tenderly. "Though I'd say I got the better end of that bargain." As the sun set behind the Sierra Nevada, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, Zara reflected on how a moment of desperate sacrifice had led to a lifetime of joy. Sometimes, she thought, you had to lose everything to gain what truly mattered. In Hunter's arms, watching their children's laughter, she knew without doubt that she had found exactly that.